book review. Doki doki. Hello everybody, I'm back. Did you think I forgot? No, I didn't. I just been not doing my homework. Sumimasen, I am sorry. When I was in Japan last month, I didn't really have much chance to read. I knew my time there was limited, so I really just wanted to focus on being in Japan. There's been a lot of news articles about book club. I don't know if you read them, but some of them are great. Just praising the idea that obviously getting more people into reading. A British bookstore, very big British bookstore. They had a select table of books, and they were all books that I had reviewed, and it made me think, wow, it definitely had an influence on sales if they feature these books in a specific way. It's not like they said PewDiePie aisle or anything like that, but it's cool. Should I force anything else positive into this before I begin? I don't think we need to do that. Thank you. Now, first book I read was The Dice Man, written by Luke Reinhardt. This was a suggestion by Brad. Hooray for Brad. Thank you, Brad, for suggesting. A lot of you guys suggested this book as well, and I can definitely see why. I think Brad told me that he read it when he was younger, and I think it's the kind of book I would probably appreciate if I was younger as well. Not saying that it's stupid or anything like that. It's just, it has a lot of flaws that I thought was a bit hard to oversee. Is that how you say it?
Overlook.
Doesn't matter. The book is written by Luke Reinhardt, who is also conveniently the protagonist. How strange. It follows the story of Luke, who is a psychiatrist. He's very successful, he earns a lot of money, he has his wife, he has his kids, but he just doesn't feel happy where he is in life. His best friend is advancing before him, even though he's not as clever as he is. He just feels stuck in a rut, basically. So in a drunken idea, late at night, he decides that he's going to roll a dice, and if it lands on a 6, I think it was a 6, it doesn't matter, he is going to rape his best friend's wife, who has been sort of flirting with him a little bit. And here it sort of shows how amateurish the writer is, or maybe he just needs a better editor. I don't know. There's really no reason for him to want to rape his best friend's wife. I understand that he needs to undergo this drastic change of character, but they justify it as, oh, well, she liked it more than I did. I feel weird even talking about it, and it's not like I'm prude or anything like that. But nevertheless, this event has such a drastic change of his character that he becomes the Dice Man, and he decides to live his life by the rule of the dice. He will write down a couple things that he wants to do and a couple things that he doesn't want to do, and he plays them on the number of the dice. So if he rolls a 1 or a 2, he'll do this. 3 or a 4, he'll do this. 5 or 6, he'll do this. So that determines his life. And it's interesting in a way how that makes him break free from his rut, essentially. His character that's just too comfortable. A lot of the times it's obvious what you want to do. And you always go for the obvious choice. And he explains that the Dice Man as... there's so many things that you miss out on by not doing that never gets to live because you always go with the obvious choice, and by constantly going with the obvious choice you end up too comfortable in the way that Luke was in the beginning of the novel. Luke really decides that he's going to push this for scientific purposes, or for his studies. He's going to push the limit of the dice and following the dice as a godly figure to its very limits. It's not like the whole idea of flipping a coin is anything new. It's not like there's anything that special about it, but it becomes a cult, and he becomes a cult leader of the dice. It's an interesting concept of self-control, also letting go of that control to something else. And while reading it, I was feeling like I want to try this out. When I was in Japan, for example, me and Marcia, a lot of times the things that we enjoyed the most were not the things we had planned for, but the things that we just happened to stumble upon, which I think is what it's trying to get at. The book very confidently says on the cover, "This book will change your life." It won't. I really enjoyed it at the first half, but the second half was just unnecessary. I think it tried too hard to be commercialized. The story takes almost like a movie-like plot, or the FBI is after him. And there's just so many sex scenes in this book. I think there's like 30 sex scenes in it. And it just became cringeworthy after a while. I'm like, this is just ridiculous. At the end of it, it sort of made me question the the skill of the author, and if the concept of the dice was even that great to begin with. It just seems so like some sort of pseudo-psychiatry, and who knows, maybe that's what he was trying to mock anyway. Next, I read Stoner by John Williams. This was a book that when it came out, it barely sold anything, but then later, 50 years later, it got translated and it picked up in popularity. Now it's very highly regarded. When I explain my favorite novel to people, or at least a novel that I really enjoyed, a lot of times I'm met with a skeptic look like, that doesn't sound interesting at all. What are you talking about? A good testimony of a good writer is that if you can tell a seemingly uninteresting story and captivate your reader, that's a great way to test it. And I think Stoner is exactly that. Now, I was reading this and I kept thinking, when is the punchline coming? When is the weed joke coming? I was on page 420 and I realized I've just spent hours reading a boring book about a boring man's life. It has nothing to do with weed. Not a single weed reference. I'm just kidding, obviously. It's actually a really great book. I really enjoyed reading it. It follows the story of William Stoner, which can be summarized as life sucks and then you die. So fuck the world and let's get high. 420, everybody. It's so cringeworthy jokes. I'm sorry. William Stoner grows up on a farm. He goes to study agriculture, and a part of his study, it's obligatory to study English literature, and he completely falls in love with it, and he loves it, and he switches his studies completely to literature instead of agriculture. And at the day of his graduation, he very selfishly tells his parents, I'm not coming back to help at the farm. I'm going to keep studying to become a teacher. I can't relate to that at all. I escaped to Italy to become a YouTuber and abandoned my studies. So maybe I can't fault Stoner too much in this. It sets the swing of the story of Stoner's life. Whenever something positive happens to Stoner, it's met with something negative. He falls in love with literature, but at the cost of disappointing his parents. He falls in love with a woman and they get married very quickly, but then he discovers that she's actually very horrible to him and they don't match at all. So anytime something positive happened to Stoner, it's met with something negative. He loves teaching his students at school, but it becomes very hard for him to do so because of the department. He gets a daughter that he loves very much and care for, but the daughter, after a while, sort of turns against him because of his wife. It just keeps on rocking back and forth for Stoner, and you just have to, when reading it, you can't help but appreciate his immense stoicism and how much he endures of bad behavior from other people that just brings him down. You just want to pat Stoner on the back and say, it's okay, you did your best, man. I always try and force some sort of ideas in there. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but the way I saw it is that there's two sides of the coin in life. You're gonna be happy sometime and you're gonna be unhappy sometime. And you can just hope that you end up on one side more than the other. Just because you endure a lot of pain and a lot of bad behavior, and just because you're a good person and work really hard for the things you love, that doesn't necessarily mean happiness is some sort of reward or something that's owed to you. It just doesn't work like that. That's just the state of life, and that's the balance that we all have to go through. Stoner does it in such grace, and the way he endures it all, you can't help but look up to him and his character. In a lot of ways, he's a hero, and I think that's how the author described him, as an angel in the end. It's a fantastic read. I really enjoyed it from start to finish. I think this was the novel that I found the easiest to read and plow through. So if it sounded interesting, give it a go. Next up, we have Crime and Punishment. It's a classic. You've definitely heard about this. Have you heard about this? It was written by Fyodor Dostoevsky in 1866. It was the longest one I read, and I mean that. Sometimes this book was very hard to get through, but the parts that shines in this novel truly shines, and I do understand why it's a classic. And I want to just focus on the bits that I really enjoyed, which is the bits revolving around the main character, Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov is a young man who lives in St. Petersburg. He is, like I said, young, attractive, intelligent, and since his father died, his mother and sister had focused on him a lot more, which led him to come up with insane idea that he is going to murder and rob an elderly pawnbroker named Ivanovna. He sees Ivanovna as a lesser human, a bad human, and she has the only thing that Raskolnikov doesn't have, which is wealth. Raskolnikov is very poor, and he sees it almost as an injustice. Following Raskolnikov's ideas around why he wants to commit this murder is the bits where I really enjoyed. I don't know what it is about following someone's internal thoughts about something that's just bizarre and insane. The truest, honest thoughts about someone. And I think that's why I really like Japanese literature as well. Nevertheless, Raskolnikov doesn't see anything wrong with murdering this woman. He thinks it's justified, and he almost sees it as a practice of, can he commit this crime? Is he able to commit the perfect crime even? And he sort of sneers at other people that hasn't been able to commit the perfect crime. So he sneaks into Ivanovna's apartment and he murders her with an axe. Unfortunately, Ivanovna's stepsister enters the scene of the crime, and Raskolnikov is forced to murder her as well. Now, obviously, this wasn't part of the plan, and he sort of very clumsily escapes the murder scene, and he only gets a little bit of gold from the apartment. But still, somehow, he managed to escape without anyone seeing him commit the crime. He hides all the gold and the murder weapon, and then we're followed with the second part of the book, the punishment. We get to follow Raskolnikov's internal struggle through conversations with other people of why he committed this crime and what made him want to actually do it. If he didn't take the gold, what was the true reason behind it, and the guilt with it. The bits that I especially enjoyed was the last third of the book. Raskolnikov wants to confess to his love, Sonia, that he committed this murder, and he stumbled upon his words, and he stumbles upon his reasoning that before was so clear to himself, but when explaining it to someone else, he just can't get the right reason and words out. And I really enjoyed this bit. I don't know, it's so interesting following these thoughts and the change of Raskolnikov. Eventually he turns himself in, despite the fact that there was no real evidence against him. I think he was just so tired of dealing with this internal struggle and conflict. And even though he doesn't necessarily think that what he did was wrong, he compares his murder with what other people have done in the past and not received any punishment for. People doing even worse things than him and getting away with it. So why should he have to feel bad? But he turns himself in because of Sonia, the one he loves, and he wants to serve his punishment. And I think the epilogue where they explain this was a bit forced. These classic novels, they always have a very strict conclusion to them, at least what I read so far. So maybe that's why. The reason why Raskolnikov struggled so much, maybe he had found logic behind what he did, but he put himself above society, and that was his demise. What do you think? Have you read it? What do you think? Personally, I was extremely bored with the family conflict that was going on throughout this book. It didn't interest me at all, but nevertheless, I really enjoyed it. I would love to read more from Dostoevsky in the future. I'm told that The Idiot is even better. Are you still with me? Next up, we have No Longer Human with Osamu Dazai. I feel my voice is just different talking about this. It's just such a sad story. It follows the story of Oba, and we follow it through some notebooks that he has left behind. I love Japanese literature. I really enjoyed reading Murakami, but I loved reading Yukio Mishima and now Dazai. They so beautifully describe the internal monologue where the protagonist is so extremely self-aware of the interaction and ideas that they have. I'm explaining this really poorly, but essentially, the way Japanese culture are so polite, it's hard to understand the true character behind a person. And to then read a Japanese novel by these authors so brilliantly described, I just feel so immersed into it. Funnily enough, that's exactly, well, there's nothing funny about it, but that's exactly what No Longer Human is all about. The main character, Oba, can't present his true self to other people. He has this facade that he hides behind, and he makes jokes to other people to hide his true self. And he's extremely self-aware of this fact, and we don't get to follow the jokes that he makes to other people. Instead, we We get to follow his ideas of how he thinks other people perceive his jokes. It doesn't sound interesting at all. I just wanted to give you an idea of how it's written, basically. Something that I've really grown to appreciate over the years is honesty. If I notice that someone isn't being really themselves or being honest, I always wonder, if you're not honest, then who are you? What are you? I don't want to play along with your facade. And sometimes in this novel, someone calls out Oba for not being genuine. Maybe he laughed in a way that they didn't think was really authentic. And he recollects on these moments in his life where he did get called out for his facade. And he describes it in such immense pain that someone is discovering that he isn't actually human. The story of No Longer Human is an incredibly sad story, especially afterwards finding out about the author himself, Dazai, who shares so much with the main character. He was sexually assaulted as a child, which is most likely what led to him protect himself behind this facade. The double attempt of suicide with his wife, where the wife died but he survived, and the guilt of keep on living. Problem with alcoholism and drugs. All these things that the character Oba goes through has happened to Dazai at some point in his life as well, the author. At the end of the book, there's a very chilling moment where Oba is talking to his friend Hokiki, I think his name was, I don't remember. And Hokiki is sort of his character opposite. It's his friend, but almost sort of his enemy. He's very direct and very straightforward, unlike Oba, who hides behind a facade. And whenever Hokiki is involved in his life, it sort of triggers these bad behaviors in Oba, where he turns to alcohol and all these things. In this moment, they're both drinking, and they're discussing the crime and punishment, funnily, and discussing what the antonym of a crime is. And Oba sort of goes off, as he usually does, in his analytic way of what it actually is, while Hokiki is just sort of not really following and making these really dumb assumptions. Hokiki then leaves the room and commits adultery with Oba's wife. Oba doesn't do anything to interfere with this. And it's at this moment, when you read the novel, it's because he's no longer human. And this happened to Dazai as well, and it's clearly a very personal tale. Reading it, in retrospect, it almost feels like a goodbye. And the same year, 1948, as this novel came out, Dazai, he had multiple suicide attempts. Finally, he succeeded to commit suicide by drowning himself in the river, and his body was found on the day of his 49th birthday. I feel like I didn't do it justice by reading this book first. This is clearly the final chapter, and I want to try and be more careful in the future when I pick a new author, to make sure that I read in the right order. I absolutely love reading this book. Dazai clearly is a phenomenal writer, and this is everything I would want from a novel. Next up, I read Yukio Mishima's Sun and Steel. I'm not going to discuss this book because I think I want to save Mishima for another time. I just wanted to give a quick thanks to Bloody on Twitter for sending me their copy of the book. I couldn't find one before I left to Japan, and I really wanted to read it. It was funny, I walked around with the book. Long story short, I needed to put a paper in something without crinkling it. And so I was using the book because it's very big. It's already becoming too long. A lot of other people saw me holding this book in Japan, and they were all, "Oh, Yukio Mishima!" I don't know if it's, I didn't realize how popular he was. I wonder who looks up to Yukio Mishima in Japan. Super fascinated by Mishima, but we'll save that for another time. Next up, for next week, we're going to read Inferno by August Strindberg. I want to read Spring Snow, I think it's called, by Yukio Mishima, and Runaway Horses by Yukio Mishima. I'm gonna be a little bit selfish and just read books that I genuinely just want to read. I'm sorry. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for all the support on the book review. It's been fantastic. I always doubt myself if it's really worth it or not. to make these, but all the positive support and all the comments has been great, so thank you very much. That's it for me for now. I'll see you by the end of the month with another book review. You can read all of them or none of them, but I'll see you then. Goodbye.